Is social media the cause of all this loneliness? Are the older generations correct when they've been saying that it's evil and it's terrible and we should all get off of it and we should just return to a time when social media didn't exist? Well, we're going to cover that and a lot more in this episode today, all about social connection. Welcome back to Travis Makes Friends podcast and this segment, Make Friends with Travis, where it's just me, you, and the mic, getting to know each other a little bit better. And we're tackling the issues of loneliness. It is our mission here on the show to end loneliness, because I believe that everything that you want in life is on the other side of a really great relationship. So that's what we're talking about today on the Travis Makes Friends podcast. Last week, we talked all about the loneliness epidemic, some of the repercussions that are coming from it, both are really from a complete holistic health perspective, mental health, financial health, physical health, all being affected by loneliness to the degree of affecting your physical health more than smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. We talked all about that on last week's episode if you want to go check that out. In this week's show, we're going to talk more about social connection. So we talked about loneliness and social isolation last week. Now it's about social connection. What is it? What are the three components that make it up? And how does technology affect social connection? Is it bad? Is it really the ultimate evil, the thing to blame for all of this? And then to close, we're going to talk about the three main ways that social connection influences our lives, which will draw back to the fact that it's a really important topic and something that we should probably all be talking about a little bit more. Plus, I got some great questions from you all over my Instagram at Travis Chappell. Every week from here on, I'll just be posting a little question form. So anybody who submits in there will have a chance to get those questions answered on the show. Questions like, how do you keep in touch with a new friend you're excited about without seeming clingy? Good question. And then why is it so hard to make friends in your mid-30s in a new city? And then a couple others that we might tackle depending on time. So let's get into it. First up, social connection. What is social connection? Well, social connection is actually feeling connected to other people socially. I know, it's pretty groundbreaking stuff here. But there's three components to it, all right? The first thing is structure, then there's function, and then there's quality. And this would define what social connections are. So structure would be the number and variety of the relationships, and then the frequency of interactions. So think of, your household. How many people are in your household? Whether you're growing up, you have siblings and you have parents, or you're an adult. Do you have a significant other in there? What's your marital partnership status? Your closest friend circle size, and then the number of people that are in your house. So structure. Then we go into function. Function is the degree to which relationships serve various needs, like emotional support, mentorship, or support in a time of crisis in your life. Do you have those things from the relationships, from the structure? And then lastly, the quality. So we have structure, function, and quality. The quality is the positive and negative aspects of relationships and interactions. So relationship satisfaction, how well things are going. Relationship strain, the pain of having close relationships, because there's pain involved. And then social inclusion or social exclusion. So we have structure, we have function, and we have quality. And besides that, there's a few other things to understand about this. Okay, and now this is just telling you what makes up social connection. Okay, so there's nothing crazy here. It's just when you think of social connection, you tend to think of it like on this black and white thing. It's like you're either lonely or you're not. But really, it's a continuum. There can be times where you feel lonely. There can be times where you feel connected. There can be times where you have robust friend groups. There can be times where maybe you are, got forced to work virtually and didn't, whether you wanted to or not, you find yourself in a position where you don't have the opportunity to hang out with people who inspire you or people who motivate you or anything like that. So it's a continuum of social connection. It's not just one way or the other. So too often indicators of social connection or social disconnection are considered in dichotomous ways, but the evidence points more to a gradient, and everyone falls somewhere on this continuum of social connection. So with low social connection generally is associated with poorer outcomes, and higher social connection with better outcomes. And then also social connection is dynamic. It changes over time, right? The amount and the quality of social connection throughout our lives, it's not static. It doesn't stay the same. Social connectedness over time can be improved or compromised for a myriad of reasons: illness, moves, job transitions, countless other life events, as well as changes in one's community, society. They can all impact social connectedness in one direction or another. And then what I thought was interesting about this is all, again, this is a lot of this is from the Surgeon General's report. that I'm reading off of. Transient feelings of loneliness may be less problematic or even adaptive because the distressing feeling motivates us to reconnect socially. So, that's why it's important to understand these things, because there's varying factors and varying degrees of loneliness. And we probably all at some point throughout, any given period of time, whether it's a day, a week, a month, a year, feel some feelings of loneliness. And that can also, that can actually be helpful. It can push us toward improving social connections, and push us toward reaching out to an old friend to say, hey, we push us toward grabbing a cup of coffee with somebody you haven't seen in a while, or something like that. But if it becomes chronic loneliness, and the crazy thing is that this loneliness can be impacted whether or not it is the actual truth or it is perceived to be true. So that's kind of the alarming part of this, is that although, let's see, it says, temporary experiences of solitude may help us manage social demands. However, chronic loneliness, even if someone is not isolated, meaning that they are not actually, like, a problem of theirs is not that they don't have friends or they don't have family or they don't have people who care about them. So chronic loneliness, even if someone's not isolated, and isolation, even if someone's not lonely, represent a significant health concern. So even if you feel lonely, but you're not isolated from people, or even if you are isolated, but you don't feel lonely, they represent a significant health concern. So, man, all of this stuff, again, it surprises me how many problems that we have in society, as in culture, stem from loneliness and social isolation. And social connection can be some of the antidote to that. So I thought this was an interesting point as well. Much like the absence of disease does not equate to good health, the absence of social deficits or loneliness does not necessarily equate to high levels of social connection. Although some measures of social connection represent the full continuum, others only focus on deficits, which do not capture the degree to which social assets may contribute to resilience or even enable thriving. So that's why it's important to say, like, this is a continuum, because you might think that it's black and white. Oh, well, I have a lot of friends, or I don't really feel that lonely all the time. And that's not necessarily the direct indicator of whether or not you're going to feel adequately supportive, or supported, or it's not going to necessarily contribute to your resilience, to your success, to the next stage of your career, or enable thriving in your life. So, for example here, first, think of a person who's part of a large, maybe highly involved family. And then second, an individual who has regular contact with colleagues through work, but little time for personal activities outside of work. So you have somebody who's like very involved in family, not really as much in work, and you have somebody who's very involved in work and doesn't really have a lot of time for family and friends. So in each case, that person is not objectively isolated, meaning that you have people in your life. You're consistently rubbing shoulders with people who, maybe in the work situation inspire you or challenge you or sometimes frustrate you. And in the family situation, the same. So you're not objectively isolated, and you don't feel subjectively lonely. But in both cases, key measures of isolation and loneliness may miss whether they're reaping the benefits of social connection in other ways. So that's why it was important to break those down into those three ways: the structure, the function, the quality. Because just because you have close relationships at work does not necessarily mean that you're going to feel adequately supported in a time of crisis, or that you have high quality close relationships. And just because you're plugged into a good family structure also doesn't mean that you have a bunch of high quality close relationships, or that you're going to feel adequately supported during a time of crisis. If your family believes one thing and you don't believe the thing that they believe, then you might feel isolated from all your family, even though they love you, or you're invited to Christmas or whatever it is. So just because you're checking off these boxes, if that makes sense, just because you're like checking off, okay, I have a lot of friends, I'm plugged into my work, whatever, or I'm checking the box of like, I don't feel lonely a lot or whatever, does not mean that you're necessarily going to receive the benefits of actually being fully engaged into the social connection, which I think is very very interesting. And it provides an opportunity for growth for everybody watching this, listening to this, including myself. There's something that I was definitely looking at, because I wouldn't be somebody who would be like, yeah, I feel lonely. I wouldn't be somebody who would look at my relationships and be like, oh, I need more. I need a bunch more relationships or connections in my life. But to the are they actually positively affecting me to the point where they are high quality, close relationships where I feel adequately supported, right, and function where I get the emotional support. Maybe I get mentorship from somebody who's far ahead of me in life, or support in a time of crisis, like, a cancer diagnosis or whatever might be on the horizon, or in the rearview mirror in my case. So something to very much consider when you're looking at the three vital components of social connection, and what that means for you, for your life, and if you feel socially connected. Okay, so social connection, impacts of technology on social connection. All right, so this is where I wanted to spend a little bit of time today, because this is kind of where the general overall rhetoric is, I think, in cultures. Like, the more that I've been having these conversations with people, the more that social media and technology gets blamed for just about everything. If it's not that, it's COVID. It's like, hey, did you start? Somebody asked me today, did you start creating podcast content around loneliness because of COVID? And I was like, no, I started doing networking relationship stuff back in 2017. It had nothing to do with COVID. And I don't think that most people realize that it's been an upward trend for quite some time, even beyond social media. So let's look at the facts first, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what I think these facts are telling us. All right. So technology is obviously pervasive in our lives. Social media, smartphones, virtual reality, remote work, artificial intelligence, assistive technologies, these types of things, they are literally a part of everyday life, even for people who are in a potentially lower socioeconomic status, people who would historically have struggled to have access to the same types of things. I mean, they have free cell phone programs now. Like, everybody has access to the grid, to the internet, to social media, and to all these platforms. And then a lot of people are doing the remote work thing. The majority of their human interaction comes from Zoom, or they're using artificial intelligence to communicate or to express thought that isn't really their thought. It's not actually them getting their thought into the world. They're just asking artificial intelligence to come up with some thoughts for them, and think for them. So they're obviously pervasive in our lives. Nearly all teens and adults under 65, and 75% of adults 65 and over say that they use the internet every day. Americans spend an average of 6 hours per day on digital media. 1 in 3 adults 18 and over report that they're online almost constantly, quote unquote. And the percentage of teens 13 to 17 say that they're almost constantly online has doubled since 2015, which is really not that long ago. That was a pretty crazy stat to me, that it's almost that it's actually doubled. That the number of teens 13 to 17 who say they're almost constantly online has doubled since 2015. So when looking at social media specifically, the percentage of US adults 18 and over who reported using social media increased from 5% in 2005. Makes sense, because it was basically like MySpace. And I think Facebook might have been invented at that point. If it was like very, very, very early on. So 5% adults 18 and over in 2005 to roughly 80% in 2019. And then teens 13 to 17, 95% report using social media on a consistent basis, with more than half reporting that it would be hard to give up social media. So 95% as of 2022 for teens aged 13 to 17. So what does this actually mean? So there's, as with any technology, there's good things about it, there's bad things about it. So some of the actual good things in terms of fostering community can actually come from the internet. There's a lot of Facebook groups. There's meetup.com, which can plug you into certain communities and get you, you can go join a hiking group in your area, or arts and crafts, or singing, or photography, or podcasting even. There's meetup groups and local stuff for all those things, but you wouldn't be able to find a lot of those things if it were not for the internet. And then there's a lot of, great online groups, support groups that allow individuals to share personal experiences, to seek advice, to connect with others, and get real social support from people that may not even be like plugged into their local community, just because we do have technology. So to pretend like there's no benefits from it, or that it's a net negative, or that it's like really bad for us, or we should go to a time when we didn't have it, stuff like that, I think it's a little reductive to pretend like it's not a nuanced subject, because it definitely is. And there's been a lot of great social connection benefits from using social media. However, there's also some harms, as you can imagine. I know it's surprising, but some examples of those harms include technology that displaces in-person engagement, monopolizes our attention, and reduces the quality of our interactions, and then even diminishes our self-esteem. That last one, to me, is a very, very big one. diminishing your self-esteem. It can lead to greater loneliness, fear of missing out, conflict, and reduced social connection. For example, frequent phone use during face-to-face interactions between parents and children and between family and friends increased distraction, reduced conversation quality, and lowered self-reported enjoyment of time spent together in person. So that's an interesting thing to hone in on, is that even if you're spending time with people in person, which is how you should be cultivating the majority of your relationships, in my opinion, even if you're doing that, if you're plugged into your phone while being a part of those conversations, then you're not only going to reduce the conversation quality, but you're going to reduce your own potential enjoyment of having that social connection to begin with. You're going to reduce your enjoyment of that relationship, which is obviously detrimental, because then it gets into your head and you remember how you felt leaving that conversation, remember how you felt leaving that interaction. And what you felt when you were in that interaction is lack of enjoyment. You have distraction, and you are more focused on this person who's talking shit online than you are at forging a deep relationship with the person in front of you. And it can almost feel like work, like, because you're trying to do both things at once. You're trying to focus on this, you're trying to focus on that. And so when you have these like conflicting, battling thoughts in your mind, you leave that conversation, you obviously feel like you just put in a ton of work, because you were doing mental gymnastics the whole time because you weren't focused on the connection with that person. So self-reported enjoyment of time spent together in person is lower because of frequent phone use during face-to-face interactions. This was the big one for me. This is a big one. In a US-based study, participants who reported using social media for more than 2 hours a day had about double the odds of reporting increased perceptions of social isolation compared to those who use social media for less than 30 minutes a day. So 2 hours a day had about double the odds of reporting increased, and here's the key word to me, increased perceptions of social isolation compared to those who use social media for less than 30 minutes a day. It's not even necessarily the objective measurement of social isolation. It is an increased perception of social isolation. So you are just training your mind to believe that you are more socially isolated if you're using social media for more than 2 hours a day. So literally double. So from more than 2 hours a day to less than 30 minutes a day, double the odds of reporting increased perceptions of social isolation, which is obviously a really big problem. Not to mention, targets of online harassment report feelings of increased loneliness, isolation, and relationship problems, as well as lower self-esteem and trust in others, which we'll see in a different episode, are very important for building community and getting rid of those feelings of isolation and loneliness. And then evidence shows that even perpetrators of cyberbullying experience weakened emotional bonds with social contacts and deficits in perceived belongingness. So this is, when you see those haters online, you see people, even in my own comments, that are talking shit and just being mean all the time. They're shooting themselves in their own foot, and it's not because they're emotionally stable and successful and strong people. It's because they're all like, the very act of doing what they're doing is also causing them to experience weakened emotional bonds with social contacts and deficits in perceived belongingness. So it's like this loop of bullying where they feel isolated and lonely, and they feel weakened emotional bonds with their friends. And so they go take that on other people, and then the act of doing that just makes it worse. And then obviously, the people who they're doing it to, if they're internalizing these things that they're saying, it makes it worse for them as well, and decreases trust in the general public, which is very true. And that's something that I've experienced firsthand with some of the hate. It's not like my stuff is massive, but I've gotten enough hate over the years to have to figure out a way to deal with it if I wanted to continue putting out content, because it's just going to be part of the thing. And it affects your trust in the general public. It affects your trust in most people. When you're just out here doing your best and you got people who are, for no reason trying to make it more difficult on you. So here's my thoughts on this. Okay. I think it's clear, because there's one stat actually that I left out here that I don't want to leave out. Here it is. The highest rates of social isolation are found among older adults. Young adults are almost twice as likely to report feeling lonely than those over 65. So this is where the difference between, we talked about this last week, but to reiterate, there's a difference between social isolation and loneliness. Let's see if I can actually find the exact definitions here. Let's see. It was illustrated. Social isolation, loneliness, related, not the same. Social isolation is objectively having few social relationships, roles, group memberships, and infrequent social interaction. So it's objective measure based on relationships, roles, groups, community interaction, things like that. And loneliness is subjective internal state. It's the distressing experience that results from perceived isolation or unmet need between an individual's preferred and actual experience. So unmet expectations when it comes to relationships, or increased feelings of perceived isolation. So one's more subjective, the other one is more objective. And so when in this particular stat, what I thought was so interesting is that the highest rates of social isolation, so the more objective measurements, are found among older adults. So these are, the older adults. Obviously, they don't have school, they don't have college, they're not going out on the weekends to the bars and stuff like that for the most part. So these people actually have objectively higher rates of social isolation, but young adults are almost twice as likely to report feeling lonely. So subjective feelings of loneliness are almost twice as high in young adults, even though the objective measurement of social isolation is much higher in older adults. And I gotta think that something about that has to do with social media and the things that young people participate in that older people are not participating in. However, the one thing that was that I thought was interesting here is that the rate of loneliness among young adults has increased every year between 1976 and 2019. So, what are my thoughts on this? Like, is social media really the problem, or is it the cause, the root issue? I think it's pretty clear to look at it and say, like, no, it's been happening since 1976, every single year since 1976. And social media, hasn't been around that long. So it cannot be the only culprit. It can't be like the core causality of all of this stuff. And here's the thing: with the advancement of technology, we get to solve problems, right? Which is fantastic. That's what technology is for. It helps us solve problems. But along with problems that we solve, it also gives us a set of other problems to solve. So we solve one problem, but then it gives us other problems that we have to then go solve. And so to use an example, the steamboat was introduced in 1807 by Robert Fulton, changed the way we traveled. It quite literally propelled us forward and changed the lives of pretty much everybody on the planet at that point, to go from using a sailboat to using a steamboat, an actual engine that was pushing these boats forward. However, it brought a whole new set of problems. Engine failure, boiler explosions. Like, it was like the vessel, the lifetime of a vessel was not super long because boiler explosions were a fairly common problem that they had to solve. There's river hazards. Imagine the health of the people that are in the belly of a boat, just shoveling coal into a fire to get steam going so that the boat could go forward. The health problems that they were facing, they were difficult to control, required a ton of maintenance, were dangerous, and ultimately posed a whole new set of problems for those people. So look, there's an entire generation who had to deal with the problems of that particular advancing technology. And I bet you anything that there are some people back then who were saying something along the lines of, man, like, I wish we could go back to a time, before we had these damn steam engines everywhere. Back in my day, we just sailed on a boat. We used the wind, and God's breath propelled us forward, and we didn't need all this other fancy stuff. But they didn't just sit there and complain about it. And they didn't go backwards, because that's not what we're meant to do as humans. We're not meant to go backwards. We're meant to solve problems. Which is also why, we end up being more fulfilled the more problems that we solve, ironically. So, when they were faced with that problem, they didn't just go like, okay, well, let's scrap that and go back to sailboats. They decided to, hey, how do we solve these new problems that this technology that took us from this age to this age is going, how do we solve these new problems that this technology presented to us? And generationally, what happens sometimes is that new generations get presented the problems that older generations' solutions caused, right? So in older generations, they're facing a problem. They build a technology to solve that problem. And then the next generation has to deal with the repercussions of the problems that solution caused. And then they are tasked with the the mission of solving those new problems. And so, we can whine about technological advancement, about social media, about the internet, about being connected to each other, but then also more disconnected than we've ever been. Or we, as millennials, as Gen Z, we can rise to the challenge and start, crafting our own solutions to those problems and continue moving forward from this. Not just saying like, axe it, it's done, we got to get rid of it. We just got to figure out more solutions to the problem. And then, just like what happened with the steamboat. So steamboat replaced sailboats, right? Steamboat gets invented. They use it for a long time. Then early 1900s come along and a guy named Rudolf Diesel invents, you guessed it, the diesel engine. The diesel engine ended up replacing the need for steamboats. He's a German engineer back in the early 1900s, developed the diesel engine, which is actually a really fascinating story, by the way, as a complete side note. Douglas Brunt wrote a book called The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel. I highly recommend it. It talks about the invention of the diesel engine and the adoption of the diesel engine and how it was, going a little bit slower than people thought it would because it was a revolutionary technology at that time, and frankly still is. It's still more efficient than a lot of this other stuff that we use, especially in vehicles. It blows my mind how we're not using more diesel than gas for so many reasons. But anyway, I digress. And then really cool story about how the Germans advanced the technology sooner because it was German technology. And that's what their U-boat fleet was made of in World War II. And so Winston Churchill and the Allies were trying to figure out a way to combat these U-boats because they were destroying the British Armada, which at the time, which was like the number one naval power in the world. And for every new boat that Kaiser Wilhelm would build in World War I, every new boat that they would build, England would go build 2 boats, so that they would always make sure that their that they controlled the seas, that they were the naval power of the world. And then the U-boat came along with the diesel engine because you couldn't do steam in a U-boat underwater. There's no place for the steam to go, right? So they used the diesel engine to create these to build these U-boats. And then Winston Churchill, the theory is anyway, that Winston Churchill basically faked Rudolf Diesel's death, moved him to Canada, put them in their own manufacturing process, and started constructing their own diesel engines, which helped us to help the Allies to basically craft enough vessels to fight the German U-boats, and was a big turning tide in the war. So very, very interesting story. I would highly recommend Douglas Brunt's book, The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel. But my point is, sailboats and then steamboats, and then all the problems that came along with steamboats, and then somebody else came along that was like, hey, there's a bunch of problems that this previous solution caused. What if we had this new solution to all these other problems, and then it fixed all these other problems that were existing? So is social media to blame? Is it the root cause? I don't think so. I think it's pretty clear to look at the data and go like, yeah, it's been happening since 1976. It's not the only thing. We're always looking for distractions. Before phones, it was just newspapers, it was TV, it was radio. We're always constantly looking for distractions. But social media has made engaging in distraction ubiquitous. It has made it extremely easy, simple for anyone to access distraction at any time that they want to. So is it the cause? No. But is it an accelerant? Absolutely. It's gasoline on the loneliness fire. And we as a generation cannot afford to turn a blind eye to it. But instead, we got to engage with it, get our hands dirty, be grateful for the work ahead of us, be grateful for the problems that we have to solve. Because we didn't have any problems to solve, I don't think that any of us would be happy. Frankly, I think that we get fulfillment and happiness and meaning from solving problems. And I think this is going to be one of the big problems that our generation is going to really need to focus on to solve. We've already solved so many of the health problems. The life expectancy, they're saying right now that there's people alive that should be living to 150 plus. Life expectancy continues to get longer. Western medicine has created some amazing things. I think that as we kind of start attacking the health crisis and the food that we eat and things like that, it'll also increase longevity, start giving better access to knowledge around nutrition and health than the things that we can do naturally to help prevent disease. And then if, God forbid, something happens, then we have Western medicine to come in and help kind of abate or solve some of those problems. So if we combine nutrition and wellness and health, exercise with Western medicine, and we start using them both together instead of being in this camp or this camp, and then I think that health and longevity is going to be something that's it's accessible to basically everybody. But if we don't solve the loneliness thing, loneliness will have a greater detriment on any of those things, our health, our longevity, the quality of our lives, than any of those other things, because it affects each and every one of those aspects. And if it's something that we just continue to put off, it's something that we continue to avoid, then it does not bode well for us as a generation in the future, but also for generations beneath us. It's like smoking in the previous generation, man. Like, nobody knew that it was a problem until it started becoming a problem, until everybody was getting lung cancer. It was like, oh, maybe we should stop smoking, and maybe we should build a solution to this problem. The bummer part is that was a pretty easy solution. It was a simple solution, rather. Maybe not an easy solution because it's addicting and a lot of people don't want to stop doing it. But it's simple. The simple solution is stop smoking. And then you'll probably get sick less. You'll probably not get lung cancer. Like your odds decrease significantly. So for them, it was very much just like, hey, stop smoking, and then you're good. Whereas loneliness and social isolation is a much bigger, more nuanced problem, which we get to solve. So there we go. So we talked about the components of social connection. We talked about the impact that technology has on social connection. Now let's go ahead and jump into the ways that social connection impact our lives. All right. So 3 main ways. So we have the components of social connection, and then we have the ways that social connection influences health in our lives. And that's through 3 principal pathways. Number 1, biology. Number 2, psychology. And number 3, behaviors, which basically represents the quality of our life. Our biology, our psychology, and our behaviors. That's what's going to predict who we're going to be in the future, how we're going to think about ourselves, the happiness level that we'll have, the fulfillment level that we have, the relationship qualities that we have, all from biology, psychology, and behaviors. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to draw attention to here, especially as it relates to exercise. Let's see. So social connection influences behavior. It is associated with a number of health-related behaviors, including lifestyle behaviors, diet, exercise, sleep, and treatment adherence. Taking medication as directed, or engaging in recommended prevention measures, which is really the big thing, is prevention when it comes to health and wellness. Like, prevention is trumps detection. And those ultimately are going to influence our health and longevity. So social influence can be direct, loved ones encouraging one to get more sleep or reminding someone to take their medication, or it can be subtle through social norms that communicate approval or disapproval from social proof of certain behaviors, like, smoking, drinking, or doing things that are like objectively bad for you. But you have somebody that's kind of like, hey man, maybe stop smoking 2 packs a day. In fact, evidence shows people are far more likely to be physically active if their peers and friends also exercise. And they're more likely to stop smoking themselves if their social contacts do as well. So it influences your behavior. This is something I've talked about for years on the show: networking, being around people, watching your inner circle. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So it obviously is going to have a big influence on the things that you decide to do about your own health, the things that you decide to do about your own well-being. So influences your behaviors, which is going to extend beyond just your health and get into education, economics, the way that you thrive in the workplace or don't thrive in the workplace, the advancement of your career, making more money, even taking care of your money, spending your money better, having better spending habits, investing in good investments, not being distracted or sidetracked by things or by money pits. All of these things are going to be, your behavior is going to be affected through those things. So now biology. So how does it influence your biological process? So the role of social connection on biology emerges early in life, continues across the life course, contributing to risk and protection from disease. This, again, I know I say this all the time, but it's mind-blowing research to me. Several reviews document that social connection can influence health through specific biological pathways, including cardiovascular and neuroendocrine dysregulation, immunity, and gut microbiome interactions, which the microbiome, so much more research is coming out about the microbiome that we don't know. But it's very clear that the microbiome is something that has been ignored for decades, but is also directly correlated to your overall physical health and even your mental health as it share as it communicates with your brain and stuff like that. So the regulation of these systems is critical for good health, and documented influence between social connection and biological pathways likely explains the impact on the risk and the development of disease. And biological systems, they don't operate independently. So that means that, increases in blood pressure, circulating stress hormones, inflammation can occur that just makes anything, any risk in your body potentially, compounded throughout the rest of your body. So this is one thing that I really wanted to highlight here. Biological pathway of great interest is inflammation, given that it's been implicated as a factor in many chronic illnesses. Chronic inflammation throughout the body has been linked to various chronic illnesses such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, depression, and Alzheimer's, all from inflammation. And evidence shows that being objectively isolated, or even the perception of isolation or loneliness, can increase inflammation to the same degree as physical inactivity. Wow. So even if you're doing the right things, you're going to the gym, you're going on walks, you're going on runs, whatever it looks like for you to get your physical exercise in, even if you're doing those things, if you are not socially supported, if you have, if you're objectively isolated, or you have the perception of isolation, or you have feelings of loneliness, then inflammation can increase directly correlated to completely being physically inactive, which is, it's crazy. It's crazy. So it's influences your biological processes. It influences your behaviors, your economic and educational benefits, and all those things. And then it also influences your psychological processes. Adults across the globe rate their social relationships, particularly those with family and close friends, as the most important source of meaning, purpose, and motivation in their lives. And a sense of meaning positively contributes to health because it motivates greater self-regulation in pursuing goals, including health goals. So if we don't feel meaning, if we don't feel purpose, if we don't feel motivation, man, it bleeds into everything. Just this psychological piece, it's going to bleed into your own decision making. It's going to bleed into your own into your own behaviors, into your habit formation, into your ambition for a better career, in your ability to solve problems. Like, if you can't just get yourself out of bed because you have these feelings, then it's going to affect every single part of your life. And then if you have a large percentage of the population, which 50% of Americans have recently reported feelings of loneliness, like, no wonder we have so many problems. We have so many health problems. We have so many social problems. The polarization of the political landscape is seemingly worse than it's ever been before. There's no empathy. There's no willingness to listen to other people's stories, and it makes a lot of sense when you look at this data that this many people feel feelings of loneliness, feel feelings of social, or they are objectively socially isolated. And if it affects your behaviors, it affects your biology, it affects your psychology, then of course it's going to have detrimental outcomes on your health. Heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and like we saw last week, an increase in all-cause mortality just from loneliness and social isolation. So social connection is, in my opinion, the number one problem that we as society, we as a generation, millennials and Gen Z even coming up behind us, that we need to solve to help not only with the betterment of ourselves as individuals, with having a happier life full of meaning and joy and fulfillment, having increased better health, better wealth, more prosperity, all as individuals. It obviously will help us all on an individual level, but if we help ourselves on an individual level, it will also have a greater effect on the collective level as a whole. So crazy stuff again this week, all about social connection. We talked about loneliness and social isolation last week. This week, we talked about the three vital components of social connection, which is structure, function, and quality. We talked about impacts of technology on social connection, and how social media is one of those things that's definitely adding fuel to the fire. That one about reporting participants who reported using social media for more than 2 hours had double the odds of reporting increased perceptions of social isolation compared to those who use social media for less than 30 minutes a day. Which, hint, hint, what does that mean for you? Probably maybe set some timers on your phone. Less than 30 minutes a day. Especially if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling socially isolated, spend less than 30 minutes a day on social media. Set one of those timers on your phone. Set the screen time on your phone thing to make sure it shuts you out of the app. Ask somebody to hold you accountable. Talk to a friend. Say, hey, you see me on social? Tell me to get off of social. Be proactive about it. We obviously need to come up with more ubiquitous solutions, more solving the root problem as a society. But individually, you can set your own boundaries and your own rules to prioritize your own feelings of belongingness and your own feelings of social connection. So we talked about the technology piece, and then we talked about how it influences your health through biology, through psychology, and through your behavior. And then that's the crazy thing about those three things is that they all feed each other. If you have stress, hormones, inflammation, and stuff like that, then it's probably going to feed into the loneliness feeling. And, you're probably going to get more into that psychology zone of not feeling meaning, not feeling purpose. The stress is not going to help. Maybe you don't feel safe. You don't have hopefulness. You're losing all of these things psychologically. And if your biology and your psychology are interacting with each other to produce this suboptimal, negative environment, then it's obviously going to dramatically affect your behaviors to make you start making poorer decisions, like not going to the gym, not going for a walk, not going outside and getting some sunlight and some vitamin D, not drinking water primarily and drinking sugary drinks and soda and or alcohol and things that are objectively bad for you, maybe even smoking or not getting enough sleep. All of these things are so important, and it become like we're shooting ourselves in the foot to see if we can walk by not also addressing the biology and the psychology of it, because the behavior is just the production of what's happening inside of your body, in your mind and in your physical body. And so if you want to change those behaviors, man, you got to start thinking about it from a holistic perspective as well, and start setting some of these boundaries for yourself, getting off of social media, hanging out with friends more often, getting good sleep, drinking proper water, getting sunlight, and stuff like that. So now in the next episode, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about actual remedies, solutions. We're going to talk about the 6 pillars that the Surgeon General lays out for how to overcome social connection, to advance or social isolation and advance social connection. We'll talk about those, and we'll talk about the one thing that I think is missing from that, that I would add into that. So we're going to start talking more about the solutions to these problems. And we went a little bit long this episode, so I don't have time to do the Q&A. So I apologize for those of you who put in good questions. We'll get to them next week. I'll do it first thing next week. And then we'll start talking about some of the solutions, because man, it's necessary, and we got to start thinking about this as a society, as a generation, or it could end up with some detrimental results that will be felt for a very long time for a lot of people. So remember, I'm opening up my calendar in an effort to stay socially connected to those of you who are watching, who are listening to this. So if you're interested in connecting with me, just head over to travischappell.com/chat, CHAPPELL, travischappell.com/chat. And you can book a time in my calendar for 15 minutes. Anybody, it's free. There's no agenda. It's just to connect and say thank you for watching the show, for listening to the show, and see how we can make the show better. But then ultimately just to connect, say what's up, and get out of those feelings of loneliness, talk to somebody. So in an effort to try to help make that happen, travischappell.com/chat, go there, schedule a call, and let's talk soon. Catch you on the next episode. Remember to leave every relationship better than you found it.